All right, back again for part 2 of our Daily Current Affairs deep dive. This one's really for those of you prepping for the UPSC exams. We're going to focus on topics you need to know for both prelims and mains, so let's jump right in.
Sounds good. We've got a lot to cover today, some really key developments that touch upon all sorts of aspects of Indian society and the economy. Prison reforms, groundwater depletion, the coffee industry, even net neutrality.
Okay, let's unpack all that. Starting with this landmark decision for the Ministry of Home Affairs. They amended the Model Prison Manual and the Model Prisons and Correctional Services Act. Why the big changes?
Well, it really stems from a Supreme Court order to address caste-based discrimination in prisons. It's all about ensuring equality and dignity for every inmate, no matter their background.
So no more segregating prisoners based on caste. Does this affect the tasks assigned within the prison as well?
You got it. The amendments prohibit discrimination in any form, including work allocation. Remember Articles 14, 15, and 17 of the Constitution. Equality before the law, prohibition of discrimination, and the abolition of untouchability. Those apply inside prison walls, too.
This makes me think of the prohibition of employment as manual scavengers and the Rehabilitation Act of 2013. Is there any connection there?
Definitely. The amendments make it clear that this act applies to prisons, too. No more forcing prisoners into manual scavenging or any kind of hazardous cleaning. It's a big step towards a fairer and more humane prison system.
All right, shifting gears a bit now, let's talk about groundwater. The Ministry of Jal Shakti just released its latest report. What's the overall situation looking like?
Honestly, the report paints a slightly concerning picture. The total annual groundwater recharge and the extractable resources both have decreased marginally. We're basically drawing more from the ground than what's being replenished naturally.
Oh, that sounds alarming. Are there certain areas in India that need to be extra worried based on this report?
Yes, there are some regions that the report flags as overexploited and critical. You're mainly looking at the Northwest, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Western UP, also the West, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and down south, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. Those areas need to pay close attention.
So what are the main things causing this depletion? Is it mostly natural or are human activities the main problem?
It's a bit of both, but overuse for irrigation is a big factor. We're talking over 60%. Inefficient irrigation practices and water-intensive crops like rice make things worse. And then you have decreasing recharge due to things like deforestation. Plus, climate change with its unpredictable rainfall doesn't help either.
It really shows how important it is to manage our water sustainably. Okay, moving on to something a little brighter on the economic front, Indian coffee exports. I heard they've seen a huge jump. What's the story there?
Yeah, it's impressive, a 45% increase in dollar value. A lot of it has to do with the surge in Robusta coffee prices globally. They've hit a 45-year high. Increased global consumption and weather issues affecting supply from big producers like Brazil and Vietnam are driving that.
So India is riding the wave of this global coffee craze. Anything else going on?
There is actually another interesting factor, the European Union's new deforestation regulation. They want to make sure products imported into the EU aren't contributing to deforestation.
I see. And how does that affect Indian coffee exports?
Well, there's been some stockpiling ahead of the regulation coming into force, maybe due to worries about increased costs down the line. It's definitely something to watch.
Okay, now for a topic that's always a hot button issue, net neutrality. Looks like the U.S. and India are going in different directions on this one.
Yep, a U.S. court just ruled against the FCC's attempt to enforce net neutrality. Meanwhile, here in India, we've had a regulatory framework in place since 2018.
Just to refresh everyone's memory, what is net neutrality all about? I know it's something UPSC aspirants need to have a good understanding of.
At its core, it means all internet traffic should be treated equally, without ISPs playing favorites. No preferential treatment for certain websites, apps, or content. It's all about a level playing field online.
So what's the situation in India specifically? How strong is our net neutrality framework?
India's framework generally supports those principles, but there are exceptions in specific cases like content delivery networks or specialized services. It's a more nuanced approach compared to a strict net neutrality stance.
Finding that balance is always tricky. Now, how about we put on our archaeologist hats for a minute? The chief minister of Tamil Nadu announced a pretty interesting prize, didn't they?
Yeah, $1 million to whoever can decipher the Indus Valley script. We've got thousands of these inscriptions on seals, pottery, tablets, but we still can't read them.
It's like having a treasure chest but losing the key. What secrets could be hidden in that script? What could we learn if we cracked the code?
Unlocking that script would be huge. We could learn about their social structure, religious beliefs, interactions with other civilizations, maybe even connections to later Vedic practices. It's a real mystery just waiting to be solved.
Speaking of mysteries, the FAO just released its statistical yearbook. Gives us a snapshot of the global food and agriculture scene. What were some of the key takeaways for you?
There were some interesting trends. The share of agriculture in the global GDP has held steady around 4%, but the number of people employed in agriculture has dropped significantly.
Oh, that's interesting. So agriculture is still economically important, but the way people work in the sector is changing. What about food security and nutrition? Did the report say anything about that?
It did. The report points out that global hunger affects 9.1% of the world's population, and there's a worrisome gender gap. Women experience higher levels of food insecurity.
That's a stark reminder that there's still a lot of work to do on ensuring food security for everyone. Did the report talk about sustainability in agriculture at all?
Yeah, and there are some alarm bells there. Both agricultural land and forest area have declined, and greenhouse gas emissions from agri-food systems are going up. Clearly, we need to find more sustainable ways to feed the world.
It's a complex problem that needs urgent attention. All right, before we move on, let's touch on a couple of other events that caught my eye.
All right, what did you want to talk about?
There's the Panchayat Se Parliament 2.0 initiative. It's all about empowering women representatives from scheduled tribes in Panchayati Raj institutions.
Oh, that's a great initiative. It's focused on boosting their leadership skills and knowledge of governance.
Definitely. And we also just have the birth anniversary of Savitribai Phule, a real pioneer in education and social reform.
Yeah, a remarkable woman, remembered for her work in promoting girls' education and advocating for social justice. She left a real mark on Indian society. It really is amazing to see those kinds of initiatives and how people are driving positive change. But let's turn our attention to something a little different now, the world of science. Researchers have made a pretty big discovery when it comes to gravitational waves.
Oh, yeah, I was reading about that. Didn't they use the largest gravitational wave detector ever built for this?
Exactly. And using that, they've confirmed that our universe has a constant background, like a vibration of gravitational waves. It's a huge confirmation of Einstein's theories.
I'm sure we've got some science enthusiasts out there prepping for the UPSC, so let's break this down. Can you explain what gravitational waves are for those who might not be familiar?
Think of it as like a ripple in the fabric of space. It's invisible, travels at the speed of light, and causes objects in its path to stretch and squeeze a tiny bit. Imagine the universe is always humming, and these waves are the vibrations we can now detect.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. I remember learning that Einstein predicted these waves back in 1916, but they weren't actually detected until 2015.
Right. It was a huge deal when scientists at LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, first detected them. And now this new finding shows that they're not just isolated events. It's like a constant hum, a background to the universe.
Like we've tuned into the universe's symphony. Okay, let's bring it back down to Earth now and talk about something a little closer to home banking. There's been some news about some major Wall Street banks pulling out of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. We're talking big names like Goldman Sachs. What's that all about?
So the NZBA, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, it's a group of banks worldwide that have committed to aligning their lending and investments with the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. It's basically a pledge to fight climate change through their banking practices.
Sounds like a good initiative. So why are these banks withdrawing?
It's complicated. Some are worried about legal and regulatory risks that come with the alliance's commitments. Others say the targets are just too ambitious, tough to actually put into practice. It kind of highlights the difficulties in trying to transition to a net zero economy, even when there's good intentions.
It's a good reminder that even when people want to do the right thing, the path to sustainability can be pretty bumpy. This makes me wonder, are there any Indian banks part of this alliance?
Not at the moment. No Indian banks are members of the NZBA, but the global push towards sustainable finance is definitely something they're paying attention to.
That's good to know. Now, speaking of trends, the medical world is always full of new developments. Scientists have created this new nanopore-based tool that could really revolutionize disease diagnosis. What's so special about this nanopore technology?
Nanopore technology uses these incredibly small holes, we're talking nano-sized, embedded in a thin membrane. When charged molecules, smaller than the nanopore, go through it, they create a signal. And the signal can be analyzed to detect specific molecules, even disease markers, super accurately and fast.
So it's like a tiny detective, finding clues inside our bodies. What are some ways this could be used?
The potential is huge. It could change the way we diagnose diseases completely. It could be faster, more accurate, and way less invasive. Imagine figuring out what's wrong with someone just by looking at a simple blood sample and doing it early on. They're even looking at it for non-invasive cancer detection and personalized medicine. It's really exciting stuff.
It really is. Okay, switching gears again, this time to the mining sector. The CSIR Central Institute of Mining and Fuel Research just did their first trial blast using something called the Dozer Push Mining method. Can you tell us about this new method?
The Dozer Push Mining method is a pretty big deal for the mining industry. It uses unmanned automated machines to really improve the whole mining process, making it faster, more efficient, and much less risky compared to traditional methods.
So it's all about making mining safer and more efficient. How does this method compare to the conventional ways of doing things?
Well, one thing is it allows for much quicker coal recovery, so you don't have delays from things like bad weather. It also saves a lot of money, relies less on manual labor, meaning fewer risks to workers, and importantly, it's designed to control vibrations and projections of loose rocks, what we call fly rock, keeping everything within safe limits. So it's better for the environment too.
Sounds like a step in the right direction for sustainable mining. Okay, now let's talk about something that highlights the amazing diversity we have in India. The Konda Reddi tribe has been in the news lately for their unique approach to relationships. What makes their tradition so different?
The Konda Reddi tribe are classified as a particularly vulnerable tribal group, and they have this interesting practice of preferring live-in relationships over formal marriages. It's mostly because traditional weddings are so expensive, it can be a huge financial burden for many families in the tribe.
That's a fascinating cultural tradition. Where are these tribes mostly located?
You'll mainly find them in Andhra Pradesh, specifically in the hilly and forest areas of the East and West Godavari and Khammam districts.
Speaking of regions, the central government just announced a big investment in Odisha's education system. They've approved a bunch of funding for universities and colleges under this program called PMUSHA. What's the goal behind this investment?
PMUSHA, or Pradhan Mantri Uchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, was launched in 2023. It's all based on the National Education Policy 2020. It's a centrally sponsored scheme aimed at improving the quality of higher education in state-run universities and colleges, particularly those in rural areas. They want to bring these institutions up to the standards.
So it's about raising the bar for higher education across the country, making sure quality education is available no matter where you are. What are some of the key things that PMUSHA is focused on?
It covers a lot. Promoting equity, access, and inclusion in higher education, improving the way teaching and learning happen, bettering accreditation standards, developing digital infrastructure using ICT, and ultimately helping people get jobs through multidisciplinary learning. It's a comprehensive plan to make our higher education system stronger.
It's great to see such a big vision for higher education in India. All right, before we wrap up this segment, let's discuss this recent development concerning NGOs. The Union Ministry of Home Affairs put out a directive to chartered accountants telling them to report any violations of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the FCRA, by NGOs. Can you explain why this directive is significant?
The FCRA, which was passed in 2010, controls how individuals, associations, or companies can accept and use foreign contributions in India. This directive basically shows that the government is serious about transparency and accountability when it comes to NGOs, especially those getting funds from overseas.
So they want to make sure these foreign contributions are used the right way, that there's no misuse going on. What are some of the key things in the FCRA that NGOs have to follow?
There are a few important points. NGOs need to be registered if they want foreign funding. They need to provide detailed reports on how they spend that money. And there are rules about how they can move those funds within India. The 2020 amendment made it even stricter, like not allowing them to transfer foreign funds to other NGOs.
Seems like they're really trying to keep a tight rein on foreign money coming into India and making sure it's used responsibly. Okay, before we go to our last section, let's talk about the Panchayat Se Parliament 2.0 initiative. The Lok Sabha Speaker just inaugurated it. What's the idea behind this program?
Panchayat Se Parliament 2.0 is a team effort. The National Commission for Women, the Lok Sabha Secretariat, and the Ministry of Tribal Affairs are all involved. It's about empowering elected women representatives from scheduled tribes in Panchayati Raj institutions.
It's really encouraging to see initiatives like this empowering women in leadership, especially at the local level. What does this program do to achieve that?
They give these women a ton of training and help them build their knowledge. They learn about the Constitution, how Parliament works, and the best ways to govern. It's all about giving them the tools and know-how to be effective leaders in their communities.
It sounds like this program is really helping to boost women's participation in our democracy, which is great to see.
Absolutely. It's so important to have women involved at every level if we want a democracy that really works. But let's zoom out a little and look at things globally. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, put out their World Food and Agriculture 2024 Statistical Yearbook. It's got everyone talking, and for good reason. It's full of data about food and agriculture all around the world. What were some of the big takeaways for you?
One thing that really stood out to me was the difference between how much agriculture contributes to the global GDP versus how many people actually work in the sector. So agriculture makes up a pretty steady 4% of the global GDP, but the number of people working in agriculture globally has actually gone down quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It shows how important agriculture still is to the world economy, but the way people are working in that sector is definitely changing.
For sure. Okay, let's bring it back to India. The government has made some moves to tackle caste discrimination in our prisons. They've changed the Model Prison Manual and the Model Prisons and Correctional Services Act. What was the thinking behind these changes?
These changes came about because of a major Supreme Court ruling. The court wanted to deal with the problem of caste bias that's been going on in prisons. They basically said that even though people are locked up, they don't lose their basic rights, and that includes protection from discrimination based on caste.
It's a good reminder that ideas like equality and fairness should be everywhere, even inside prisons. All right, let's switch gears again. The Ministry of Jal Shakti just put out their latest report on groundwater, and it's got some people worried. What did the report find?
The report shows that things aren't looking so good for India's groundwater. Both the total yearly recharge and the amount we can actually take out have dropped a little. It means we're using groundwater faster than it can naturally refill itself. That's not good if we want this vital resource to last.
Yeah, it's definitely something we need to watch it closely, especially since India relies so much on groundwater. Okay, let's end on a positive note. India's coffee exports have been doing really well lately. They've seen a big jump. What's behind this success?
Indian coffee is making a name for itself on the world stage. There are a few things driving this success. For one, people around the world are drinking more and more coffee, and there have been some weather problems in the major coffee-producing countries. So that's pushed up the demand for Indian coffee.
So India's in a good spot because of the global market, it sounds like. Is there anything else contributing to this?
Another thing is the EU, the European Union, they've got this new regulation about deforestation. They want to make sure anything imported into the EU, including coffee, isn't causing deforestation. That's led to more people wanting Indian coffee because it's seen as being produced sustainably.
That's great news, both for the people growing coffee in India and for the planet. It's good to see India doing things the right way in the global coffee market.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today, from social justice to the global food system to some really exciting science discoveries. It's been a lot.
It's been a great journey through all the latest news, and I hope our listeners are feeling more informed and ready to engage with what's happening.
Definitely. Keeping up with the news is so important for understanding the world and making good decisions. And for our listeners prepping for the UPSC exams, this is all especially useful for both your prelims and mains. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more discussions just like this one. We'll be back with more soon. Until then, keep learning and exploring.